So, it's been a while since I've done a ranking video. And since I finally got through all of the 8 previous Fast and Furious films, I think it's time to talk about that. I mean, I've already talked about a couple of the previous films, but yeah, this is an odd franchise to say the least. Trying to start off as somewhat grounded, realistic, has just basically become this over the top action franchise, and no one really knows where exactly they started turning into James Bond type agents from carjackers. But yeah, I think we should just rank the 8 previous films. So let's do it. At the very bottom, we have The Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift. Now, I will defend this a little bit. Tokyo Drift does sort of touch on themes on self identity, family, and finding a group of people that you can fit in with. And it should be admired for trying to tackle those kinds of themes. The main problem is that it's with characters that we never see again. I mean, this is technically the first introduction of Han, who dies in the third film, but since apparently a lot of people liked him, they just brought him back for 4, 5, and 6, and sort of turned Tokyo Drift into technically the 6th film chronologically, which just basically ruins any sort of logical sense within the actual timeline. I mean, at this point in the franchise, they probably could have done something sort of along the lines of an anthology series. I mean, the second film was mainly focused on just Brian and Roman Pierce, and since the third one really had nothing to do with Dom or any of those people until like a 10-second cameo right at the very end. So maybe trying to turn into more of an anthology direction probably would have worked better. I can't say that for sure, but it's just looking back on it now, it just doesn't really seem to fit in. Now let's go on to number 7, which will be Fast and Furious. This is the 4th film in terms of release dates, and it brings back Dom back in the main character role. And while it does sort of try to get back to the roots of the original film, it just feels a little underwhelming somehow. I mean, this is mainly because, well, some of the main issues relate to continuity errors and some pretty big plot holes in between the release of the 4th film and the other previous films. At the beginning of this film, Brian is back to being an FBI agent in LA looking for criminals. While in the second film, he was in Miami and it looked like he was about to go into business with Roman Pierce. It makes no sense in terms of timeline continuity and logical narrative sense, but it is better than Tokyo Drift. So let's move on to the 6th film, which will be the second film, actually, Too Fast, Too Furious. I do have a little bit of a soft spot for this film. At the time, this was a more comedic film than the original film, and the addition of Tyrese Gibson as Roman Pierce was actually a fun addition, and I still enjoy the character to this day. But again, due to some of the story threads that had now been set up due to other sequels, it just feels like somehow this feels out of place. But I still had a lot of fun watching this film, actually. Now let's move on to the 5th film in my ranking, which will be The Fate of the Furious. First of all, that has got to be the dumbest name we've come up for this franchise for any film. Fate of the Furious, really? The only word puns I'll accept is for the 10th film when you do fasten your seatbelts. Anyway, this is the one film where the actual story in the movie absolutely makes no sense. Yeah, I know people will say that for like the 5th, 6th, and 7th film, but... And while it is true to a certain extent, it did make some sort of narrative sense, actually connecting with one another and actually have an emotional value to it. With this film, there's no emotional value, makes no sense logically speaking, and this is the film that many people point out to as the film that tries to represent just how stupidly ridiculous this entire franchise is, and I can't really fault them for that. So why is it so high on this ranking? Partly due to the lack of quality of the other three films, and partly because it is stupidly entertaining. It has actually some of the best action sequences in the entire franchise, and Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham are actually the best part of this film. I know people would argue with me, and I will talk about Dwayne Johnson versus Vin Diesel in the Fast and Furious franchise in a later video, but honestly, it's one of those like stupidly entertaining films with some great over the top fun, and it actually kind of makes me a little bit excited to see Hobbs and Shaw. Not gonna lie. And of course, there are some behind the scenes drama, which I won't get into in this video, but I will address in a later video. Now let's move on to the fourth film in my ranking, which will be the very original, The Fast and the Furious. This is actually pretty well grounded film, honestly, if you go back and look at it. At the time, many people called it a ripoff of Point Break, which is accurate. But there's still a lot of fun and some interesting characters and fun moments in this film. And it is sort of interesting to look back at this film now and to see where the franchise ended up. And it kind of makes you ask the question, would the franchise be better if they stuck with this grounding route like they tried to do with the second, third, and fourth film? Or is it better that we have the over-the-top, balls-to-the-wall fun action franchise we have today? What do you think, Quachi? Interesting point. Anyway, that's why it's this high on this list. Now let's move on to the third film, which will be Fast 5. Now this is really the film that became over the top in a sense. I mean, the fourth film was really stretching it, but Fast 5 is when they decided to go in a basically completely different direction, especially with the addition of Dwayne Johnson as Luke Hobbs. I mean, by the time you get to the climax where they're dragging a vault across town and just destroying buildings and everything, you've begun to realize that this is not going to be like the previous four films moving forward. And that's good because it's still pretty entertaining, and in terms of how they set this story up in this film, it does make some sort of narrative sense. But this is really more for the action, really. Now let's move on to the second film on our ranking, Fast and Furious 6. Now this does have a bit more of an emotional element to it because it brings back a assumedly dead character, Letty, played by Michelle Rodriguez. And of course, our Dom's crew are dragged into this investigation led by Luke Hobbs, but of course, it does make narrative sense. As much as it can. Better than a lot of the other films in this franchise. And again, some great over-the-top action, the world's longest runway, and a fairly solid villain in Luke Evans as Owen Shaw. I mean, certainly he's not the best villain in the franchise, but it was a lot better than some of the other villains we had in the previous films. So, yeah, enjoyable. Now, the number one film in this franchise as of right now, Furious 7. One of the biggest issues with a lot of these previous other Fast and Furious films is that they never really had a memorable villain. Sorta got that with Owen Shaw in Fast and Furious 6, but he wasn't really elevated a little more until the addition of Jason Statham as Deckard Shaw, his brother. I mean, his first scene at the very beginning of this film really shows just what's going to happen here. Starts hunting down Dom's crew, and of course, even more over-the-top action. But there is actually a real emotional core to this film when you realize that during the making of this film, the actor Paul Walker actually died in real life. And their tribute at the very end of this film is actually very dignified and emotional, and does sort of actually try and tie up all plot threads from the previous film into one sort of conclusive ending. So really, depending on how the next few films go, Furious 7 is really where the franchise probably should have ended. But we'll learn a little bit more in the future. But I think this is my favorite of the Fast and Furious franchise as of the time I'm recording this. So that's all I really have to say right now. Like, comment, subscribe, share, and I'll see you guys next time.